welcome once again to a special EWTN on-location bookmark coming to you from the Catholic Marketing Network in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Joined on set by our author, Peter C. Kleponis, PhD. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
We've
Good
talked
to be
before,
here.
And you've been on Jeanette Bankovic's show as well. Restoring Trust, a couple's guide to getting past porn. So
Yes.
this is a tough book, and I want to warn our audience, if you happen to be watching and there's kids around, this may not be the right interview to be followed up on watching this particular program. But it's an important problem, unfortunately, isn't it?
It is. This is affecting millions of marriages out there. Studies have shown that pornography is playing a significant role in over 50% of all divorces now. So it is a huge problem. Unfortunately, few people actually want to talk about it, which then leaves millions of people to suffer in silence.
Well, how did you decide to focus on this?
Well, I've been in practice for over 20 years. For the past 10 years, I've been focusing on internet pornography addiction. And I started out working mainly with men, but then I started working with a lot of couples, husbands, a lot of wives, and couples together. So I was able to see firsthand how devastating this is. And then in the research that I've done, just looking at the studies that have been done, what other therapists have been dealing with, I realized that this is just a major epidemic in America. So many married couples are suffering and they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do.
You dedicate the book to all Catholic couples whose marriages were damaged by pornography addiction and who persevered in recovery to achieve personal and marital healing and restoration. Of the people who try to recover, how many actually do?
For those who are committed to it, the majority of them do. They really do, and it does take time. This is not something that's just going to be done in a couple of months. This can take a few years to do. But what happens is when they're committed to this, and they really are committed to each other and really persevering through this tragedy, through this suffering, they can actually develop a stronger relationship, a deeper, more intimate one. You cannot have really healthy intimacy in a marriage if one or both people are hiding some deep, dark secret.
Right, if there's actually a lie underneath there.
So when all this comes out, yes, it's terrible. It feels like it just blows up in your face. It takes a while to work on healing this, but from that can develop a much stronger relationship. And the fact is, we don't bond in the good times. We bond in the tough times. Right. And we all know it's the couples who persevere through the tough times that actually end up with the healthiest marriages.
I think that's what a crucifix is all about, reminding us that
exactly
the mercy and the healing comes through the suffering. You say, in using this book, it's designed to be a primer both for couples affected by pornography addiction and sexual infidelity, and for those who work with them, counselors, accountability partners, family members, and clergy, because husbands and wife are affected differently by pornography addiction. How so?
Well, first of all, this addiction, it used to be thought that only men struggle with pornography addiction. Well, now we know that both men and women can both struggle with it.
Has that been exacerbated by the internet and Facebook and things like that?
It has. The internet, social media, kind of this equal rights thing where if it's good enough for the men, the women should be able to do it too. And this is what's happening. So when someone finds out that their husband or wife has been viewing pornography and is addicted to it, they feel hurt, they feel betrayed, they feel that they can't compete because the people in porn are all very young and good looking and so forth.
Yes.
And
heavily made up.
Heavily made up, plastic surgery, all those things. So there's this great deep betrayal that they feel from it. In fact, we have a name for it now. It's called betrayal trauma, because the symptoms are often similar to
you talk about that
stress
in the book.
disorder.
Right, yeah.
And couples, there are many similar ways that they deal with it, but there are also many unique ways. For example, when I work with wives, a lot of them deal with a lot of sadness, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and of course men also deal with that, but they tend to funnel all that into anger. And so this is where men can respond with anger, with rage. Women will respond with sadness and depression.
Okay. Now you say that in dealing with this, it's broken into 3 sections. Now the first focuses on the addicted spouse, the second section looks at offended spouse, and third and final section focuses on the ways couples can work together. Why did you decide to break it up that way?
Well, because in the beginning of the recovery process, each spouse has their own unique path of healing and recovery. For the addicted spouse, they need to get into a comprehensive recovery program for sexual addiction, and there are many good ones out there. For the offended spouse, the betrayed spouse, they need their own healing and recovery program. They've been very deeply hurt, deeply wounded. That includes counseling, support, education, spirituality. So they have their own unique healing program that they need to work on. So they both, when in starting out in this process, they first focus on their own unique programs. Then once they've experienced some healing and recovery, then they come together and we work on the marriage. We work on restoring trust. We work on developing a really deep, healthy intimacy. Working on helping them take a look at, where do they want to go with their marriage in the future, and really developing that new relationship.
You also mentioned that in that process, sometimes people just expect, oh, we've dealt with it, it's fine, but there can be somehow some of these deep wounds from that you weren't aware your spouse might have had.
Yeah. Well, and this often happens in the healing process, and it's often 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That's the way it works, and things might come up along the way. But if they're willing to really address it, they can work through it. One of the things we often find going through this process is that couples they bring a lot of wounds into the marriage. I mean, let's face it, we all have baggage.
Right.
And and oftentimes they're not aware of how this is affecting them, how it's affecting their spouse or their marriage. Through this process, this is often uncovered, but this is a great opportunity because then they can work on addressing and healing those deeper wounds too. So it's not just healing the wounds from the addiction, but also many other wounds you may have come into the marriage with.
Right, okay. Also, one of the things you talk about, pornography/sex addiction. Is there a difference between being sex addicted and being addicted to pornography?
Well, I often use the terms interchangeably. Sexual addiction is this umbrella term. And under this umbrella are many different behaviors. There's pornography, there could be, phone sex, strip clubs, prostitutes, and so forth. What I find for most people, it's mainly pornography. But, where
is that because of easy access, privacy, I can do it, nobody knows that I'm doing it?
Exactly, all of that. So, but where I see where it goes from being the pornography addict to the sex addict is when they actually start acting out with other people. It could be, through chat rooms, through webcams. It could be through affairs, strip clubs, prostitutes, or whatever.
Right.
Once they've crossed that line, that's where we're looking at sexual addiction.
And you talk about it in the book, but somebody, a Catholic, might look at this and say, oh, this is a moral failing of this person, and you're just sticking these terms like a disease or an addiction. It takes the person off the hook. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, we do know this is an addiction. This is a disease. We now have the neuroscience evidence to show us that pornography and sex are addictive behaviors, and people do become addicted to it.
And how do we tell that? You said neurologically there are changes then?
There are neurological changes. What happens is that there's a term called hypofrontality, where basically, through the addiction, the cortex of the brain, in the prefrontal lobes, this is the part of the brain that allows you to make moral decisions, what's right, what's wrong, to be able to say yes and no and so forth. That is actually, it loses mass, it actually shrinks, okay? So, and of course the pleasure center of the brain, in the nucleus accumbens, that is way overstimulated and wants more and more. So when the need for a fix comes, that part of the brain that's able to say no, stop, is not able to do that. This is where you lose free will with an addiction. And this happens with any type of addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, whatever. So, it follows the same principles, the same path. So as I said, we now know that pornography and sex are addictive substances, they're addictive behaviors, and we need to treat them like every other addiction, like a disease. Now, just because the person loses the ability to say no to the drug doesn't mean that they are unable to recognize that they have an addiction. And with that is the moral responsibility to get help.
That's the issue. Sometimes people see this as a way to get out of being responsible.
No. And I've heard people say, I can't help it, I'm addicted. I say, oh, no. You still have the obligation to seek help and do whatever you can to heal and recover. And people are doing it all the time and they're succeeding.
Do you think most people who are addicted know they're addicted?
I think most people do. Most people do. And as the saying goes, if you think you're addicted, you probably are.
And what would be the signs of addiction? If you were to see somebody to decide where this person was on the spectrum, when they crossed over to be addicted?
Well, there's an in-depth evaluation process that we use for that includes testing, interviews, and so forth, looking at previous behavior. But there are some warning signs. How and why are they using pornography? Are they using it to avoid or deal with negative emotions? Do they find that they're using it more and more often? They're spending more time online viewing pornography. Has the type of pornography they viewed become more extreme, more violent, more hardcore? That's a sign that there is a tolerance developing.
Right, exactly.
Are they taking great risks to view pornography, such as viewing it at work where you could lose your job and so forth? And despite their best abilities, they're just simply not able to stop. Right. So if you are looking at those 5 key signs, chances are you're dealing with an addiction and need to seek
having
help.
worked many years ago dealing with certain cable channels that started out as being, soft and got harder and harder very quickly and stranger very quickly, the idea of watching the tolerance level, even of the people working on the channel, it had to get worse and worse and worse. Or as one executive said, more heat, more heat, more heat.
Yeah. Well, that's it. It's not only, do individuals who are addicted develop this tolerance, but we as a society have developed this tolerance to it. And even the pornographers admit that they're even shocked at the type of pornography they have to produce. But as the saying goes, it's supply and demand. They say this is what the public is demanding at this point.
Right, and it gets weirder and weirder usually.
It does, more deviant and scary, really scary.
Right. Now, in the beginning, you talk about the fact this book's only a beginning for people, and then you go into talking about some key terms. You mentioned betrayal, trauma a little bit before. Here's a term we hear all the time in politics, gaslighting.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Gaslighting is a term where basically you're essentially trying to divert the focus. So in other words, if a wife suspects that her husband is viewing pornography, there's some telltale signs, and she tries to confront him with it, he'll say, oh, no, you're crazy, that's not it, this is what's really going on, when really he's lying.
Right.
And it leaves her feeling like she's the crazy one.
Right.
That, she's, seeing things that aren't there.
An old Ingrid Bergman movie.
Yeah. That's what it's all about. And what's really, painful is that when it all does come out, and not only does she feel hurt and betrayed by the pornography use, but she also feels hurt and betrayed because all this time he's been lying to her, even though she knew something was going on. He kept lying to her, and that deepens the sense of betrayal.
Now you put in here the word guilt, recognition that one has sinned and must atone for it. This can lead to healing and reconciliation. And then later you have the word shame.
Yes.
Can you define those two, and so we understand the difference between guilt and shame?
All right. Well, I tell people guilt is good and shame is bad. So, and it depends on their focus. Guilt focuses on actions, while shame focuses on the person. So guilt is the emotion that says, okay, you did something wrong and now you have to fix it. All right, so you man up, you do what you need to do, you fix it, this leads to healing and reconciliation. That's a good thing. Shame, though, focuses on the person or the worth of a person. So shame is the emotion that says, okay, you did something wrong, and because of this, you're this terrible, horrible person, and you need to hide this because if anybody ever found out about it, it would destroy you. All right, now, of course, that's not coming from God.
Yeah, exactly.
It's coming from the evil one, and what happens is this is what keeps the addiction in the dark where it grows and festers. And one of the biggest challenges for anybody in this healing and recovery process is letting go of the shame so that they can really work on the healing, And what they find is that when they let go of the shame and they come out and they admit they have the problem, they find that, at first, initially, some people may be upset and angry, but after a while, as they get over it, and really, most people don't care. They've got their own problems to deal with.
Right, exactly. Now, you talk about recovery as a process. You talk about 4 signs of recovery. So the first one, being able to address problems as they happen. So having at least one person you can be completely honest with. Who would that person normally be for that person?
Well, that could be many different people. It could be a therapist. If you are in a 12-step recovery program, the people in the group, they would be your accountability partners. It could be a sponsor, obviously your spouse. It could be a confessor, a spiritual director, a good friend, a family member. And what I always recommend in recovery is, you want to have more than one person that you're accountable to, have as many as possible, because that creates an environment where if you're accountable to all these people, it's, you're going to be working more on remaining sober.
Okay. Now you also talk about here, I thought, establish establishing personal boundaries. You always hear that. What do we mean by that?
Okay. And this is something many people who struggle with addiction have a problem with, its boundaries.
Okay.
So, and what is a boundary? A boundary is like a window screen. It lets in the good and keeps out the bad.
Okay.
And so I tell people, in recovery, you need to have good, strong boundaries with people, places, things, technology, and situations, anything that could lead you back into pornography use. Like, for example, boundaries with technology. All right, that may mean that all your use of technology is being monitored. Everything is. It could be when you use technology. Okay, at 9 o'clock at night, everything gets shut down and turned off.
Right.
Between 9 at night and 8 in the morning, no technology. If you're going away on a business trip at nighttime, you lock that cell phone and the computer and the tablet in your car overnight.
I see.
And of course there are obviously certain websites, certain television shows, movies, social media you don't see. So it's all about protecting a person. Now, some people think, well, isn't that going to really limit my life and life's going to be dull and boring? And I say, no, these boundaries actually let you live a truly healthy life.
Well, I remember they used to call something called avoiding occasions of sin.
Exactly.
If you find out you have a weakness in a particular area, the best is to stay away from that, whether that's eating donuts or, or whatever it might be.
And that's a boundary.
Right.
That's a boundary.
You just got to say, I know if I start that, I have a difficulty stopping. And self-medicating, using pornography or any addiction substance behavior as a way to cope with deep emotional wounds or trauma. So are there overlapping self-medicating? Are there people drinking and then using, or drugs, or does it move from one to the other? Or?
Well, many times there are more than one substance or behavior that they're dealing with. I have several men that I'm working with right now who are coming to me, just recently for pornography addiction, but they say, well, I've been in AA for 20 years. Yeah, often there's more than one addiction. And oftentimes what'll happen is they'll trade one substance or behavior for another.
Right.
So, so they'll give up pornography, but then they'll start playing video games incessantly.
Okay.
So, and I tell people, well, in this case, you're really not in recovery. You're really not sober. You're just trading one substance or one behavior for another. And so this is where you have to be very aware that in your life, not just the pornography, but what are the other behaviors or substances that you may be using to self-medicate, to cope with some deeper wounds. And of course, ultimately, you need to address those deeper wounds.
Right, so you get into the section about marriages here, and you talked a little bit about it in general. 13% of all search engines requested for sexual content, 10% of men will admit to being addicted to pornography. About 1/3 of all visitors to pornographic websites are women. And I think that's the part that probably is the most surprising to people today.
Yeah. It used to be thought that pornography was just a men's issue.
Right, you were saying that.
We know it's not. It is a women's issue there, and they are becoming addicted.
Right, and most wives view their husband's use of pornography as seriously as an extramarital affair. How do men view their wives? If a guy isn't into pornography, it'd be one thing maybe if he is and his wife is, but he finds out his wife is using it. Does he view it the same way or the same extreme or even worse?
Well, he can view it differently, and sometimes this is actually a way of identifying that not only is the wife addicted, but the husband could also be addicted. Because you have husbands who are viewing pornography and they're addicted to it, and when they find out that their wives are looking at it, they think, oh great, we can look at it together now.
Look at it together,
and
right? This is going to help our
So
marriage
that's
and
it,
everything.
Now, one of the things that we find, men and women are wired differently. Men, we're visually stimulated. All we want are the visual, the pictures, the videos, the photos, that's all we're interested in. Women are more relationally oriented. So in addition to the visual porn, they're looking at other forms of pornography. Racy romance novels, we call this literotica.
Right.
It could also be things like, social media, chat rooms, webcams.
Yeah.
So, and where I find men are the most hurt and betrayed is when their wives, in addition to the visual porn, they're doing things like getting into chat rooms where they are having these, very sexual pornographic chats with these strange men.
Right.
So, and this is where they feel that betrayal, where they see it as an extramarital affair.
Right.
All right. So it's different, now for men, as I said, we're very visual. But we men, we also have the ability to compartmentalize our lives. So, we look at the images on the screen with pornography, and to us, well, they're just images. Right? Well, to wives, those aren't just images.
Right,
those are other people.
Oh, right. Other relationships you're having.
Other people, other relationships. So, and it's the same with a man. When a man, sees his wife in that chat room or on the webcam or whatever, again, that's a relationship. So that is the extramarital affair.
You also point out that pornography plays a significant role in over 50% of all divorces.
Yes.
So somebody might say, well, was that the cause, or that was just what happened as the marriage fell apart?
Well, it could be both. You know, we're looking at the chicken and the egg, and it depends on the situation. What I often find with the couples I work with is that the pornography addiction began even before they even met. For most people, they're introduced to pornography in their early adolescent years, and that's where the addiction actually starts. So they're bringing it into the marriage, and when it's discovered, that's where the hurt and betrayal is.
Right.
And this is one of the things I talk to young people today. Okay, when you're getting married, before you get married, you need to sit down and talk about this.
Right.
So that if there is a problem, you can deal with it before you get married, and when you are married, you're not going to be blindsided.
Right. So you talk about myths about pornography, its use and marriage. Myth number 3, if a person uses pornography, it's their spouse's fault. That's not true.
That is not true at all.
Okay.
Right? As I said, first of all, they're probably coming into the marriage with it. Another thing is that, again, the pornography is the symptom. All right, so, and we talk about self-medicating. You know, what are they using it to cope with? Often it's very deep emotional wounds that go back many, many years. And, you know, when I talk to men, they'll often say, this has nothing to do with my wife. This is just an escape. And, you know, it would be the same if they had turned to alcohol or drugs or gambling or anything else. This is what it is for them. It's just an escape. Unfortunately for a wife, she doesn't see this as an escape because this involves other women. And this is how terribly betraying it is.
Right. The other thing I would think that some of this is also the idea that, you know, in a relationship there needs to be a give and take, and for the intimacy to happen, there is that caring and sharing that goes back and forth. Well, when you're dealing with something on the web, you don't have to worry about how you treat it or what you have to do about it, and so it's easier to go to the computer. It does what you want it to do without having to be nice or good or friendly or caring or sharing.
Right, there's no work.
Right.
There's no work, and it's whatever you want, you're in control, you decide what you want and when you want it and how you want it. So, which initially can be fun and exciting, but ultimately, and any addict will tell you, it never fulfills, it never satisfies.
Right, and that's why they continue, it has to get harder and harder, or it becomes an overlapping addiction with something else.
And they have to keep going back to it over and over again.
Right. So, what can we do to protect our families and ourselves from this kind of saturation in the world where you walk around having the porthole to all of this with you?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is educate ourselves, right? Because pornography is not going to go away. You know, and we know that sex sells, so our culture is just saturated with this stuff. So you need to educate yourself on this stuff. You know, what is pornography all about? We need to understand that it is an addictive substance, and we need to work on protecting ourselves from this. So that means, as I said, first of all, couples, they need to talk about this issue. And it's not easy, but they need to sit down and talk about it, and, you know, what impact is this having on their marriage? If someone is struggling with this addiction, they need to get help, not just the addict, but both spouses and so forth. If this is something they're not struggling with, they need to talk about how they can protect themselves and their marriage from this. They need to talk about, you know, well, you know, how are they consuming media, and what kind of media, what kinds of protections are in place with this. You know, and it's really about understanding, okay, you know, God wants us to love each other and respect each other, and obviously we're not doing that if we're looking at pornography.
Right. So has this book, writing on this material and dealing, how has it impacted you?
Well, doing the research for this, you know, in some ways it was shocking, but in other ways it confirmed what I already was seeing in my own practice.
Right.
And it helped me realize that this is a major problem and we need to address it. The good news is that this is treatable. People can heal from this. They can recover. Marriages can be healed and restored.
Right.
And people can come out on top of this with something that's even stronger than they had before. You know, as I tell people, you know, in order to have a healthy marriage, you need to have two healthy people. If one or both are coming into the marriage and they're not healthy, you're not going to have a healthy marriage. Now, when this comes out, it's terrible. It's like I tell people, it's like everything just blows up in your face and you're just sitting in this wreckage and you don't know what to do.
Right.
It's a horrible place. But you can heal from there, you can grow, you can change, you can recover, you can restore your marriage, and you can have the marriage that you've always wanted to have, and the marriage that God wants you to have. God wants people to have healthy, happy, holy marriages.
Very good. Another book in the works?
Yes, but I'm not going to tell you about it.
Okay, very good. Well, people have plenty of time to read this. There's a lot to learn. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
the author
for
is
having me.
Peter C. Kleponis, PhD, Restoring Trust, a couple's guide to getting past porn. Unfortunately, a lot of people probably could find this helpful. Available through our religious catalog, I would say for adults only. And this has been an EWTN on location from the Catholic Marketing Network in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining us.